Hello everyone, happy Wednesday. Welcome to #AskRobCo. Hope you're all well, hope you all had a good week. And thank you for joining. For all of those that were here last week, thank you for coming back. For those that weren't here last week, thank you for joining today. Just to give a bit of context for all of you that are in the room, this is a Q&A. This has been created for you, which means that you have to ask questions. So look at this at the box on the side, ask your question. I'm here to answer. That's the whole point of the platform. This is a banking, lending, finance platform for people in the property industry to get live intel, live information. I'm in my 27th year in the industry, an absolute specialist expertise, 100,000 plus hours in real estate, property, surveying, valuation, bank lending, bank finance, and this platform is your platform. So get the questions and I will give you the answers. So 1 week in, those of you remember, a week ago, we opened up the property market in the UK, and what happened was that we'd been on lockdown, like the whole of the UK, most of Europe, and then suddenly we got given the opportunity to start valuing, start going into properties, estate agencies back, etc., etc. If you see the live handout from last week's on your right hand side, we have got the Q&A 13th of May handout. If you want to open that document, that was the timeline distribution in terms of suppliers, real estate valuers, chartered surveyors, conveyancers, legals, lending, banking, finance, estate agency, everyone in the supply chain. The market opened up. How was that going to work? And that's where we're going to start with today. Handout number 2 is what I promised you last week, was the RICS update on inspecting, on valuation. So if you see that document, it's there. It's a really nice document. It clearly states that we are allowed to do our job for you. If you instruct us, we are able to go into the property. It is advisable that the property is made empty and it's safely inspected using the appropriate PPE. If it's not made suitably empty, what is the reason why? And can a person be kept in one area so that you're socially distancing? Please read the document, and any questions you have relating to that document, please ask the question. So I think that's really important. Where we left last week's conversation was, are we going to be able to see all the properties? Can valuations come back into the game? The answer is yes. You've got your documentation, you've got the government guidelines, you've got the RICS guidelines, and it is now live and it's there and it's sitting for you. Valuations back in the game, all the lenders on this call, all the risk teams on this call. Yes, we are able to value. Yes, we are getting into the properties. Thank you, Colin, for your question. Is anyone refusing entry? Are there any problems getting into the property? What are people's rights in terms of health and safety? I think it's a really good point. It's very clear. If someone doesn't want us to go into a property because they're scared or they're concerned or they have a health issue, we're not going into the property. And no one can force someone to go into that property, especially when there's a health and safety concern. If one of our valuers has a concern in terms of health and safety and they're not sure whether they should be going into the property, they also have the right not to go into the property. And we would be advising them, if you're concerned or you're scared for whatever reason, don't go into the property. So first and foremost, health and safety on all sides, because we're all responsible stakeholders in this. If for whatever reason there's a concern, either the person shouldn't let someone in or the valuer shouldn't go in. So far, we've had very few issues in getting into the properties in the last week, and we have managed to get into those properties. So I think big thumbs up. If you are facing challenges, lenders and banks, and you've got issues with the valuation company or the valuer, or you've got issues with your applicant, please share the individual example with me and I'll do my best to help. We're not seeing a problem there. Okay, so it's going to take time, as I said. Document 1 from last week was supply and distribution. Let's just relook at that. It's the May the 20th today. We're in phase 2 of the distribution and supply chain. Phase 2 meant the corporates are slowly coming back into the game, which means most people in the game are the small to medium-sized firms. The corporates are coming back in. So a lot of the staff that were furloughed have started working this week. They're going to start working next week. We've got the bank holiday. As I said, stage 3, 1st of June, most of the corporates come back into the game, and then the volumes start flowing in valuation. At the moment, we've got 60, 70,000 valuations that need to be managed through the supply chain. That's going to take weeks to get through. Okay, so just because a lot of firms have come back in, it doesn't mean that suddenly everything's going to get dealt with. We're going to get into all the properties and happy days. It's going to take time. The supply and distribution chain, which is so important to everything we're doing, both in terms of underwriters and risk and lending and sales and banking and valuers and conveyancing, all of those pieces take time, and we've got a huge volume. So question from Daniel, do we see an increase in volume? Of course, we're going to see a huge increase in valuation volume over the next month or two, because I've just said there's 60, 70,000 valuations and someone's got to do them. So yes, huge volume. It's going to take time to get through them. Are we seeing increased buyer or purchaser demand or refinance, renewals, further advanced demand? Yes. Why? Because we had about 6 to 8 weeks of pipeline work. And we talked about last week about the 1 billion pipeline that we were seeing. That pipeline still needs to be managed. So refinance, further advance, renewals, huge pipeline to be managed now. And now it's live. We can get into the properties. They can play out. And the estate agents have opened. And the estate agents are being flooded with new inquiries. Now, the big question that we're going to want to see play out over the coming weeks is, are those new inquiries 6 or 7 weeks worth of inquiries, which is why the agents are crazily busy? Or is that because there's actually a huge demand and there's going to be a market moving forward? If you remember last week, for those that were here, I said we're going to have to play this out. We're going to have to see on a weekly basis, deal by deal by deal by deal, what is really happening on the ground. What intel am I sharing with you that says to you, you can lend, the market is robust, and good things are happening? So that's going to be really key on a daily basis. A really good question, Daniel. I don't know if your question was relating to valuation or was it relating to actual residential demand and transactions. So it's a good question. Maybe you can come back to me on that. Question here from Kerry. Is there a case to be made for virtual inspections? Okay, and how would you ensure this? So virtual inspections and virtual selling inspections from estate agencies, that's a lot that's been going around in LinkedIn, the internet, on the news. I'm going to be really frank. It hasn't really worked, okay? From a selling perspective, especially in prime, super prime, you're not spending 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 million pounds on a virtual inspection. Unless the property was so heavily discounted, it made sense to just go blind and proceed. That's just not happening at this moment in time. So yes, you might hear the stories. Yes, great agent A or B, what a great job they're doing with their virtual virtual visits, virtual tours, it's good, it's nice. It's not going to get you your prime, super prime. Maybe you're at 1 or 2, but it's not going to be the volume or the normal at this moment in time. 3, 5, 10 years, can that play out? For sure. Technology improves, etc., etc. That could be something for the future. It's not something for now. In terms of getting comfortable with valuations and surveys around that, I think that's an interesting question. I would say the following. great to have. Send me the video, brilliant. I can do my analysis. I can understand the nuances, the condition. But if there's a mega crack at the rear of the property and I don't get to see that, I'm definitely going to caveat against that. And it might be okay, but it might not be okay. So we all are going to have to get comfortable here from a risk perspective. As a lender, are you going to be comfortable with that? As a valuer, we're going to caveat that because we haven't physically seen the property. And so if we can all get comfortable with it, yes, it could be okay, but there's going to be the circumstance where it's not going to be okay. So I think that's something that has to be trialed over time with volume. Again, probably a piece for the future. So eventually one day we get certainty and reliability around that. And then further down the line, we get comfortable on sanction and risk and signing off on that basis. So I do think both are an opportunity and both could play out in the future. It's just not going to be happening at this moment in time. Next question, are there comparables coming back into the market and where do we see pricing? So I think one of the key points for this call was product, pricing, transaction, comparable evidence, and really deal flow, what's trading. So we've been speaking to loads of conveyancers because that's really important to get an understanding what's happening, what's not happening. We've been speaking to loads of agents because this is the intel, and we're getting the deal flow from the private banks, from the challenger banks, from the nationwide factory lenders who are doing the volume piece. We're getting the deal flow from those, and we're seeing what is happening, and the whole point of this platform is to share with you that value, that content. So let's go into that. Agents are reporting the following. Something like, this is very early stages, we're 1 week in, 3 out of 4 deals are getting over the line and going through, which I would say is really positive. And the conveyancers and the legals that I'm speaking to are also following down that path, about 3 out of 4 at this moment in time. In terms of renegotiating and pricing, some people are trying to chip and renege. Some are getting something, some are getting nothing, some are losing the deal because the vendor is saying, listen, if you want to play games, go and play games somewhere else. You agreed a price, I've taken your word, this is where we're at, you're either proceeding or you're not proceeding. And I think that's a really important point. Any of you that were in the game in 08, 09 and doing your super prime or your London surrounding area stock, if you're not a distressed seller, you're not renegotiating and letting your property go for a 5, 10, 15, 20% discount. That is not happening. It might happen in the volume market where people are nervous and they're not institutional and they're not savvy. But in the prime, super prime, if you're not distressed and you're not a full seller, there is no reason to renegotiate at 5, 10, 15%. It's only going to happen if you have to get out and you're happy to take the hit. And so it's very easy for people to say who don't know the market, oh, price is going to fall. Oh, people are going to start renegotiating. Oh, people are going to get chips. It may happen in the volume market where there is more transactions at a lower level, less certainty, less specialist sellers and buyers. But it may be prime, super prime. It's going to be, well, no, I don't need to sell. I know the value of my property to a degree. Willing buyer, willing seller, demand and supply equilibrium. We've already talked about how pre-lockdown prime, super prime was underpriced, and there's a demand and supply stock disequilibrium. So at this moment in time, there's no need for me to have a discount. Yes, maybe my discount might be 50 or 100,000. I'm comfortable to take that. But do I go beyond 5 or 10%? We're not seeing that. The conveyancers are not telling us that. The agents are not telling us that. And then the live listings of sales that we're being given by the conveyancers and by the agents that are going through are 7.3 million in SW1W has gone through with a discount of about 3%. Our prime Pimlico deal just under 4 million has gone through at 3.7 million with a 4 to 5% discount. I think what's really important is the discount from marketing and then exchange completion and renegotiating needs to be split off. And I think one of the banks that we work really closely, and one of the risk teams and the lenders asked the question a few days ago, Rob, can you come back to me with a split of data on marketing price, exchange completion price, and reneg price? And I think that's a brilliant, brilliant question that we're going to work around the clock for you for. Why? Because what you're seeing with the completions and the deals that I'm sharing with you, the 5 million deal that went through at 5 million, the 8.5 million deal that went through at 8.3 million, a few NW3s that have gone through there, a few SW7s. These deals have nuances within nuances. They have a marketing price, they have a agreed price, and then a reneg price. And we need to work out for you what those differences are. And that's definitely going to be some intel that we're going to tell you. Look, question from Laura. Do you expect to see an increase in valuation firms unable to renew their PI because of COVID or pre-COVID? Really good question. RICS, uncertainty, PI. It's a massive challenge. The insurance market, the PI market was already in a bad place. I think the answer to that is yes, Laura. I think the RICS are doing a great piece. They're supporting the market. They're coming up with new conditions to help firms renew. But it's going to be a massive challenge, Laura. You've got to watch that space. Anyone in risk, anyone in credit, anyone in sanction, you've got to be all over those renewals. It's going to get harder and harder. You've got to work really closely with your valuation firms. It's going to be a really tough place. And the demands that you put on your valuers around your PI are probably going to have to be more flexible moving forward. You're not going to be able to demand what you demanded previously because the market won't allow that to happen. And I think that's a watch this space. Question from Alice, is now a good time to buy property? That's the $1 million question. I think it's a really great question. I think at this moment in time, you've got lots of different segments and segues in the market. You've got your HMOs, your buy-to-lets, you've got your specialist product, you've got your prime, super prime, you've got your homogenous product across the whole country. I've already said numerous occasions that prime, super prime was underpriced pre-lockdown. What does that market look like moving forward post-lockdown? I'm going to be telling you week by week by week, deal by deal. I'm going to be telling you, is there a 2% fall, a 3% fall, a 5% fall? Has the market held out and is it more robust than other markets? So I think the opportunity is to understand what the market and pricing was doing pre-lockdown. Are you comfortable with those prices? Is the opportunity now 1, 2, 3, 5% better than pre-lockdown? And that suggests that when you're looking at 3 to 5 year pricing, if you did get in now, it could be a reasonable price. So the answer to that question is you've got to know your pricing, you've got to know your stock, you've got to know your marketplace, you've got to know what you're competing with, and you've got to be comfortable that you're taking a 3, 5, 10 year view on the price that you're coming in at now, knowing that there's so much uncertainty in the market. So savvy investors, especially at high end, are proceeding with deals now in excess of 10, 15, 20 million. We talked about a couple of 20 million as last week. There's been 1 or 2 10 million plus deals that have exchanged this week, and they are comfortable because maybe they're getting in at a good price, like I said, or they're taking a long-term view on pricing. And London, especially, being the secure place to invest, real estate, cheap pound, cheap pricing, and in a world of uncertainty, you go on bonds, on gold, possibly dollar, and London real estate has historically played out as a secure investment. So I do feel that each segue in the market has a different outlook and a different view, and so to understand pricing, it's not a generic answer to that question. Next question. Are the agents reporting any trends? Desire to move out of central London, high rise, looking for gardens, green space, etc. Good question, Colin. I definitely think that there are going to be some small trends in those areas playing out against the norm. So that's the new trends to look for. I think it's very early, very early, 1 week in, to be answering those trends. At the same time, you go where is safe, and safety is where money goes in times of uncertainty. So it's not the question that suddenly you're going to go into this random product and put loads of money against it because you believe that that's where everyone's going to go. I think it's more, let's spot the trends, see what's happening with the market, and maybe come into it further down the line. No one needs to be the very first person in at the bottom. You can obviously follow those trends and see what is happening. So I think that's really important. Going back to lending, credit risk, please get your questions in, because that's a big percentage of people that are signing up for this, a big percentage of people. And then on the other side, you've got your salespeople within the banks that want to know about pricing. The retail pricing is going up and up. We were at 75% a week ago. Now some lenders are going 80, 85, 90, especially main retail lenders. LTV is moving every day. And I think that's really important. Private banking, prime, super prime lending is in a different place. Your buy-to-lets, your HMOs, they're also in a different place. They've got their own pricing. So when you've got a question around LTV, please be specific with your question, because the generic answer is each sector has a different price point in terms of product and also in terms of valuation. And for me to give you a bit more help on that, you've got to give me a bit more detail around the question. In terms of deal flow and deal transactions, I think that was one of the biggest pieces for today. I want to reaffirm what I've just said previously. 3 out of 4 deals are getting over the line. That's coming from agents, that's coming from conveyancers, and it's what we're seeing. At the same time, there are some renegotiations, and I think we've got to learn what the patterns are over the coming weeks of what that looks like. So I think massive important headline for today in terms of deal flow, transactions and pricing is that deals are getting over the line. There's a good flow of those deals that are getting over the line that were from pre-lockdown, and the differentiation in terms of pricing in the numbers that we're seeing, we've still got to distinguish the difference between the headline market figure that it was being advertised at, to the figure that it was agreed at, to the figure that exchanged that, and the differentiation between that, so we understand what that is. So I think that's a definitely watch this space. Next question from Chris. Do we think that there's going to be demand from overseas investors? Is that going to get affected because of the travel restrictions? I think that's really, especially in high value, it's a really good question, Chris. I think traveling is going to get opened up in our timelines in phase 3 that we're moving into in June. So I think the travel play is a short-term play, maybe a 2, 3, 4 week play. Once we get through that, I think it's going to be fine. It is important to understand that historically prime, super prime is massively exposed to international investors. We know that's one of the areas that works extremely well. And I think that once those restrictions come down, I think we'll see a growth in those buyers. And I think that's a really good point, Chris. And I think it's something that we're going to have to watch and monitor. 80% of prime, super prime are international buyers. If some of them can't get here because of restrictions, is that going to slow down the recovery in that space? Great question. Watch this space. I'm going to make sure I keep on updating that because I think it's a great point. Last 5 minutes, get your last few questions in. I'm just going to launch quickly the topics that you want for next week. It's come up on your screen. You've got to guide this. It's your questions. I can give you all the answers in the world that, from the intel and the data that we've got and the experience that I have. Ultimately, I want you to lead that, and please just tick the area that you want or send the question, because the more questions you ask, the more you you guide me of where you want the questions, the more I can help you. Next question, Richard. We're hearing from universities are going to put courses out until the summer. How do you anticipate that's going to affect the valuation of HMOs in student locations? Brilliant question, like really good. Thanks, Richard, for that. The HMO buy-to-let piece is huge. Those of you that are lending, selling, working, doing sanctioning is massively important because people need to be in jobs to pay the rent. Student need to be in their accommodations or going to the universities to be using those properties to be paying the rent. If they're not going back to their student accommodation, or they're at home, or the foreign students aren't coming next year, or the people don't have the jobs to be in the buy-to-lets to pay the rent, how does it affect those nuances, and how does it affect the locations where those properties are? That is going to be a massive play, Richard. That's like a really good question. All of these nuances we need to track. This platform needs to be giving you the answers every week. I already raised last week, I don't know if you were here, Richard, I already raised the nuances around HMOs and buy-to-lets, how challenging that's going to be. I think the big opportunity for the bridgers and the specialist lenders on this call is those are the voids that you're going to jump into, because mainstream lending can't do that, and that's how specialist lenders grow. The mainstream lenders will take a view and say, okay, we're going to have to make risk and credit decisions here, how this plays out, whereas the short-term lenders have an opportunity. So every area of lending and risk in terms of bridging, specialists, private banking, the factory volume national coverage will really play out differently, and you will need to decide basically which area you want to take advantage of that. There's enough for everyone, and I think you can learn from this. Basically what your specialist route is going to be, whether that's your mainstream lender, private banking, looking at the opportunity, or you're quick to market because you're a bridger or a specialist. You've got to really spot the trends, really understand the supply pipeline distribution, understand what pricing is doing, what the market wants, where the attention is, and really play that out. I think the questions today have been amazing. They've opened up a lot of further questions moving forward. Ask Rob Co. Please, please, please keep on sending in the questions. Please share with your colleagues. Let's build this platform. Let's provide the intel. Let's provide the data. Let's work on risk. Let's work on sales. Let's work on private banking. Let's work on conveyancing. Let's work on bridging, specialist lending. Let's work on the mainstream lenders up and down this country and across Europe that are doing volume. Let's provide all of the information, all of the knowledge, all of the deal flow, all of the pricing that's happening on a daily basis to help you do your jobs better. This is what I'm here for. This is what the platform is here for. Have a great week. Thank you for joining. Thank you for giving up 30 minutes of your time. Thanks for your amazing questions. And I will see you all again next week, same time, same place. Be safe, be healthy, and thanks for being here. Thank you so much.